This is Claire Keefe-Fox, and today we're going to be talking about two of the books that she's published with River Books. The first one is Siamese Tears, and the second one is Bangkok in Times of Love and War. Claire is American and French, and she's had a very distinguished career as an interpreter for the French government. And then slightly later in life, she started writing novels, and she's been very successful. I should also mention here that some of her books have been translated for Nanmi Publishing. So Claire, I know lots of people must be fed up with people asking this question. But what is it about Thailand? I mean, why did you like Thailand so much?
Well, it's true that I've been asked that very often, and I used to answer the very glib and facile answer, which is, why do you fall in love? And I've been thinking about it, and I think there is no other possible explanation. Why do you fall in love? It's just a feeling of choosing and being chosen, and also the strange feeling I had the first time I came to Thailand, a feeling that I was coming home. Extremely strange feeling for somebody who really never felt quite at home anywhere, whether in the United States or in France or in Italy where I was born and went to university, or in Switzerland where I went to university. I was always somehow straddling cultures, and here I had the impression I didn't need to straddle any culture at all. I could just be myself with all the mixture that I am.
As they say sometimes, if you can't choose between two lovers, you should just find a third.
Well, that's it then.
Exactly. You found a third country.
Yes.
So tell me a bit about how you chose the first book.
Siamese Tears. Well, Siamese Tears, well, once again, it is because I am half French, and I discovered something that the French don't really tell you, that France, when carving out her colonial empire at the end of the 19th century, tried to actually acquire Thailand in her thrust of Southeast Asia. And it's important to understand about colonialism because that was the source of power for countries at the end of the 19th century. And there was always this rivalry, not always friendly, between England and France in terms of projecting power. And now, of course, the whole concept of projecting power has to do with drones and missiles and electronics. But at the time, it was basically controlling land and people. And what the French wanted was to have an Asian empire to rival the British Empire. And I realized when I was living here and I was director of Alliance Française for Thailand, the extent of the French land grab, because there is no other word for it. And the reason I wrote it in English, because my first books were written in French and they were very successful in French, and I could not write it in French. There was some kind of inner censorship that prevented me writing something so negative about one of my countries in the language of that country. And so I wrote it in English, and all of a sudden it just came pouring out. And for those who will read it realize that it is rather violently anti-French. And I remember discussing it with the French ambassador to Thailand at the time, asking his opinion. He said, we have to own our history. What we did, we did. Views change in any case. You cannot apply the principle and morality of our times to what was done then.
It's interesting you talk about owning your history, because I think history in Thailand at the moment is a very contested area. And I'd like you to tell us a bit about what is a historical novel, really?
Oh, well, there's a whole range of historical novels. You have, first of all, you have the love story, the romance in pretty costumes, and you have those which just tell a human interest story on a backdrop of events, and novels set during the French Revolution, for instance. Well, A Tale of Two Cities is a very good example of that during the French Revolution. So you have the events, and you have the historical novels like mine, which are basically the events in which you weave fictional characters, but basically it is a way of telling the story that's seen through the eyes of those who lived through it. Because I find that history can only be understood by those who actually felt it happening to them. And it's not just, I mean, the major events, people felt them, of course. I mean, you know, obviously you have the invasion of France, you have the invasion of, you have Pearl Harbor, and the invasion of Southeast Asia, you have the bomb in Hiroshima. Those are the major events. But they're all felt in possibly, probably very different ways by the people who lived through it. And that is why I want to see history as told by the people who lived through it.
So there is a link, isn't there, between the two books, which is quite intriguing to me. Obviously, I know them both very well. But do you think it's giving anything away to say what the link is?
No, the first book is written as a family history by a young man who was a bit of a loose end and comes to Siam. He visited Siam at the time. And because his grandmother had lived in Siam and told him a bit about the events of the time. And when he comes to Siam, he discovers his grandmother, his whole family's story, and he writes about it. So that is Siamese Tears. And then Bangkok, in Times of Love of War, happens after he has written that book. And he is trying to write another book, which is a more, it's more history. It is something fairly recent history, which is the story of the revolution of 1932, putting an end to absolute monarchy. And he just can't, he understands it, but he cannot write it. And so it's his struggle with the attempt to write the book, and then his life as World War II is breaking out, and then the events that follow. He falls in love, he has to leave Siam, he becomes an operative for the SOE, Special Operations Executive, and then lives throughout the war. And at the same time, there is the other thread of the story, which is the young woman that he falls in love with, who is American and who is stuck in then Thailand, and her life in Bangkok under, it is not Japanese occupation because Thailand was an ally, a so-called ally of Japan at the time, and the hardship that people endure, and just the backdrop of the war, both surrounding Thailand, and whose impact was not that much felt within Thailand, but nonetheless, the Thais who object to the alliance with the Japanese, and the Thais who are outside of Thailand and who want to reclaim the independence of their country.
And so often in your books, the men take the main role in terms of the events of history, but they're always, it's always a very powerful female character. And often this person is an outsider. In both cases, this person is an outsider and a bit of a rebel. So do you feel that these women are reflecting yourself, your character?
Well, obviously. The first one in Siamese Tears, the main female character, Julie, who is half French, half British, it brings back to what I was saying, not choosing between two cultures, two countries, being tugged to one side, then to the other, and choosing yet a third country. In her case, she chooses Siam. And also because I find that women actually are able to fit into situations more comfortably. That has to do with the times. People didn't care that much fact, when the women were there, for instance, in Siamese Tears, Julie, the Franco-British character, is able to penetrate the court of Siam and gets the viewpoint of the women. And it's always those who are, once again, living through history, victims, but never really actors of history, and also possibly the fact that I was an interpreter for the French presidency. I realized how comfortable it was being a woman. It's the fly on the wall. Nobody really cares that much about you as long as you do your job properly and don't talk, because obviously. But there you witness history, but there is no power play. Had I been a man, I think people would have minded my being around that much, whereas as a woman, I could be comfortably ignored. And it was comfortable for me as well.
And what about in Bangkok in Times of Love and War? What about that?
Well, once again, it was, she does not have as interesting access to people in power as the character in Siamese Tears. But she is there on the ground, witnessing what is happening to the ordinary people, the poor people. She is a nurse in a hospital, and once again, she is not noticed.
Yes.
And nobody asked her to do much except do her job and try, and in her case, it's a matter of survival, try and be ignored.
Yes.
But she sees, witnesses, and is on the receiving end of history, in fact.
So, what next?
Well, what next? I had been trying to write, and somehow during lockdown in France, I was blocked. It was difficult. This pandemic just fogs our minds. But there's something, there's something mulling, something ripening, and it will be about the Palace Revolution of 1910. And the story, and set more specifically within the Thai Chinese community. And we shall see.
Very exciting. Well, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
talking to us
Thank you.
today.
I'm delighted.
And I love your books. And
Well,
look forward
thank
to the
you.
next one.
Thank you very much.
ขอบคุณนะคะสวัสดีค่ะ